My daughter drained every dollar from my bank account and flew first class to Paris with her husband and his mother, leaving me behind with an empty refrigerator and a silence that felt heavier than betrayal. They believed I was just a confused old man who would quietly disappear into a state facility. What they forgot is that before retirement, I spent 40 years as a structural engineer. My entire career was built on one skill: finding the hidden weakness that makes a structure collapse. 3 days later, she called me from Paris, crying and screaming that I had ruined her life. I calmly reminded her of one simple truth: sometimes a foundation fails because of the damage done from within. Thank you for spending your time with this story. Before we continue, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I enjoy seeing how far these stories reach. Also, a quick note: some parts of Clear's throat this story are fictionalized to enrich the narrative, and any similarity to real people or locations is purely coincidental. My name is Franklin Vance, though most people simply call me Frank. I am 70 years old, and Los Angeles has been my home for my entire life. For 4 decades, I worked as a structural engineer, the kind of man responsible for making sure skyscrapers didn't fold under their own weight. My days were spent calculating loads, studying stress points, and searching for the invisible fractures that could one day bring down thousands of tons of steel and concrete. Over the years, I learned something important about structures. The most dangerous cracks are rarely visible. They hide quietly beneath the surface until the entire building begins to tremble. For most of my life, I believed my own world was built on solid ground. After my wife Eleanor passed away, I sold the house where we had raised our daughter Evelyn. That home held 40 years of memories, but keeping it felt impossible after she was gone. The money from the sale, along with my savings and pension, went into what I believed was a safe account. My plan was simple: I would use the funds to support myself in my later years and leave the rest as a legacy for my family. I trusted them completely that I would later realize was my first mistake. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the illusion finally shattered. Los Angeles was suffocating under one of those heavy summer days when the humidity presses against your chest and makes every breath feel slow and thick. I was standing in line at the CVS pharmacy on Main Street, waiting to pick up my prescription for lisinopril. My heart had been acting strangely lately, an irregular flutter the doctor blamed on stress. But deep down I knew it was something else. Loneliness has its own rhythm, and sometimes it beats louder than any medical condition. The line moved slowly overhead. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, a constant electric hum that seemed to burrow straight into my skull. By the time I finally reached the counter, the young pharmacist Cynthia greeted me with a warm smile. She recognized me immediately. After all, I had been coming there every month for years. I handed her the prescription slip and slid my debit card into the payment terminal. The card was navy blue, issued by Chase Bank, and it had never failed me before. I waited for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, the machine let out a sharp, unpleasant buzz. On the screen, a message appeared that no one ever wants to see: declined. I frowned. Assuming the chip was dirty, I wiped it carefully against my shirt and tried again. This time the buzz sounded even harsher. Or maybe it only felt that way because the woman standing behind me sighed loudly in irritation. Cynthia leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice so the others in line wouldn't overhear. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance," she said gently. "The system says there are insufficient funds." I let out a dry, awkward laugh. "That can't be right, Cynthia. I deposited my pension last week, and the money from selling my house is still in the linked savings account. There should be close to $850,000 there. Could you try running it again?" She nodded and ran the card a second time. Declined. This time a cold sweat formed along the back of my neck. It had nothing to do with the heat anymore. It was the instinctive fear you feel when you step into the street and suddenly realize a car is speeding straight toward you. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I nearly dropped it while opening my banking app. The screen took a moment to load the small spinning icon, mocking my growing panic while my heart pounded against my ribs. Then the numbers appeared. Checking account 0. Savings account $1,243. I stared at the screen, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. I refreshed the page. The numbers didn't change. $12. That was all that remained of my life's work. $12 left from the house Eleanor and I had built together. $12 left from 40 years of labor. My legs suddenly felt heavy as stone. I stepped aside from the counter and scrolled through the transaction history. There it was, a single enormous transfer completed earlier that morning at exactly 9:90 a.m. transfer to external account ending in 4492. Authorized by power of attorney. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I grabbed the nearby shelf of vitamins to steady myself as the room seemed to tilt sideways. Power of attorney. And with that phrase, a memory from 3 days earlier came crashing back with brutal clarity. I had been sick that day. Teresa, my daughter's mother-in-law, had stopped by with a container of homemade mushroom soup. She told me I looked thin and needed to eat something warm. Teresa had never been particularly fond of me. She often complained that I was too stingy because I refused to buy her son Gregory the expensive sports car he wanted. But that afternoon she had been unusually kind. Too kind. I ate the soup. Within an hour the dizziness began. My vision blurred and my muscles felt weak, so weak that lifting my head from the pillow seemed impossible. Evelyn was there beside me, my daughter sitting gently on the edge of the bed. In her hands was a stack of papers. She was crying. "Dad," she said softly, "the doctors need your signature for the insurance paperwork, just in case you have to go to the hospital." She insisted it was only routine paperwork, something that would allow her to make medical decisions if I lost consciousness. I trusted her. After all, she was my daughter. I trusted her. She was my daughter, the child I had raised and protected for 30 years. When she pointed to the lines on those papers, I signed them without hesitation. My hand trembled from the dizziness, and my signature came out crooked and barely legible, but I signed anyway. Then she asked for my phone. "Dad," she said gently, "there are so many hackers these days. Let me install a security app for you so no one can get into your accounts." It sounded reasonable, sensible even. I unlocked the phone and handed it to her without thinking. I gave her my passcodes when she asked, believing she was helping me. In that moment I felt grateful, even proud, that my daughter was taking care of me. But she wasn't protecting me. She was replacing me. While I lay there half-conscious from the drugs in that soup, Evelyn quietly added her own fingerprint and facial recognition to my phone. She transferred the two-factor authentication from my number to her device. Then she used the power of attorney I had just signed to connect my accounts directly to hers. It was not a mistake, it was a plan. The soup, the sudden illness, the paperwork, the phone, every piece of it had been arranged carefully. They had orchestrated the entire thing like engineers dismantling a building one bolt at a time. Standing there in the pharmacy aisle, the realization crushed the air from my lungs. My chest tightened as I stared at the bottle of heart medication sitting on the counter behind the glass. It cost 45.45s I suddenly didn't have. The pain of that betrayal felt sharper than any heart attack. Just then, my phone vibrated in my hand, pulling me back into the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights. A notification had appeared on the screen. Instagram. I rarely use social media, but I followed Evelyn there. It was the only way I sometimes saw glimpses of her life, small photos that hinted at the future grandchildren Eleanor and I had once dreamed about. I opened the notification. The image loaded slowly. It was bright and crystal clear. The photo showed the inside of an airplane cabin, but not the crowded rows of economy seats. This was first class. I recognized the layout immediately: wide leather chairs that turned into beds, polished wooden panels, and elegant glasses filled with champagne. In the center of the picture sat Evelyn. She was holding a tall flute of golden champagne, smiling like someone who had just won the lottery. She wore a brand new designer outfit, oversized sunglasses resting casually on top of her head. Beside her was Gregory, her husband, leaning comfortably in his seat with the satisfied grin of a man who believed he had just pulled off the perfect crime. Across the aisle sat Teresa. She raised her own glass toward the camera, her smile wide and triumphant, the same woman who had served me that bowl of mushroom soup 3 days earlier. They looked happy, ecstatic, like people celebrating the beginning of a dream. Then I read the caption beneath the photo, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. Paris bound, finally free from the burden, time to live the life we deserve. Goodbye, old life. Hello, luxury, inheritance early, new beginnings. I stared at the words for a long time. They hadn't just taken my money, they were celebrating it. To them, my life savings wasn't security for an old man. It was their freedom. They had already imagined the ending of my story. Me fading quietly into some underfunded state facility, another forgotten pensioner waiting for the end. They believed I would simply disappear. For a moment, my chest felt hollow, like the wind had blown straight through me. But slowly the shock began to fade, replaced by a colder, steadier feeling. It was a sensation I knew well from decades spent on construction sites. The moment when you study a building structure and finally see where its weight truly rests. The moment you identify the load-bearing walls. The precise points where one carefully placed charge could bring the entire structure crashing down. They thought I was helpless. They believed the power of attorney was their golden ticket. But they had overlooked one small detail. They had forgotten who they were dealing with. That money did not come from luck. It came from 40 years of contracts, engineering reports, legal clauses, and carefully written agreements. I had spent my entire career reading the fine print, and Evelyn had just triggered it. I looked once more at the numbers on my screen, $1243. Then I looked again at the photo of my daughter laughing thousands of miles above the Atlantic Ocean. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Instead, I slipped the phone into my pocket and quietly walked out of the pharmacy. The summer heat wrapped around me like a thick blanket, but I barely noticed. Inside, I felt cold. I reached my car in the parking lot, a 10-year-old sedan they hadn't bothered to steal. I sat down behind the wheel and gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Enjoy the champagne, Evelyn," I murmured softly to the empty car. "Enjoy the flight, because when you land, you're going to discover something important." I started the engine. You didn't just rob a helpless old pensioner. The engine rumbled to life beneath my hands. You robbed a man who knows exactly how to collapse a building while the thieves are still inside. I pulled out of the parking lot and turned toward downtown. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to see Victoria Croft, my lawyer, and I was about to activate a protocol I had created years earlier, a fail-safe I had always hoped would remain unused. The game had begun, and Evelyn had no idea she had just made the first move in a match she could never win. I sat in my 10-year-old sedan, and the air conditioning struggled against the humid Los Angeles heat. But the chill inside my bones had nothing to do with the temperature. I placed the phone on the passenger seat and engaged the speakerphone. I needed to hear this. I needed to hear their voices one last time before I burned their world to the ground. I dialed Evelyn's number. The ringback tone purred through the car speakers, a digital rhythm that mocked my racing heart. Connect. There was a burst of static, followed by the distinct hum of a pressurized cabin. I could hear the clinking of silverware on china and the low murmur of polite conversation. It sounded like a party. "Hello." Evelyn's voice was loud and slurred. She was shouting over the ambient noise. "Dad, is that you?" I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "You emptied the accounts, Evelyn. You took everything." There was a pause and then a giggle, a wet, bubbly sound. "Oh, Daddy, do not be such a drama queen. We just borrowed it. You know how expensive Paris is in the spring. Besides, you were just letting it sit there rotting in the bank. We are investing in our happiness. Isn't that what you always wanted for me to be happy? Investing?" I repeated, my voice flat. "You left me with $12. I cannot even buy my heart medication." She sighed, a long, exasperated sound that I had heard 1,000 times since she was a teenager, the sound of a spoiled child who has been asked to clean her room. "Stop guilt-tripping me. You are fine. You have your pension." Gregory's voice cut in sudden and sharp. "Give me the phone, babe." I heard a rustle, and then my son-in-law's voice filled the car. He sounded smug, the kind of arrogant confidence that comes from a man who has never actually earned a dollar with his own hands, but loves to spend the ones others have earned. "Listen, old man," Gregory said. "It is done. The transfer is complete. The money is offshore by now, so do not even think about calling the bank. You have no legal leg to stand on." "I never signed a check to you, Gregory," I said. "I never authorized this." "Oh, but you did," Gregory laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "Do you not remember last week you were so sick, Frank? You were practically comatose. You signed the power of attorney. It gives Evelyn full control over your assets." "Full control, Frank." That means she can do whatever she wants with the money, and what she wanted was a first-class ticket away from your whining. The memory crashed into me like a sledgehammer striking steel. Just a week earlier last Wednesday, I had been perfectly fine trimming the roses in my backyard and enjoying the quiet afternoon. The sun was warm, the soil still damp from the morning watering. Everything had felt normal. Then Teresa arrived. Gregory's mother rarely visited my house. In fact, she usually complained about the drive and found every excuse to avoid coming over. But that afternoon, she pulled into my driveway with an unusually cheerful smile, stepping out of her car while holding a plastic Tupperware container. "I made you some mushroom soup, Franklin," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "You've looked so thin since Eleanor passed away. You need to keep your strength up." Her kindness felt strange, but I didn't question it. I invited her inside. The soup was rich and creamy, thick with mushrooms and salt. As I ate, I noticed a faint metallic taste, something slightly bitter beneath the cream, but I brushed the thought away. I didn't want to offend her cooking. Theresa stood nearby, watching me carefully as I finished every spoonful. Her eyes followed the bowl like a hawk studying a field mouse. About 20 minutes later, the room began to shift. At first, it was subtle, just a faint dizziness. Then the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My fingers tingled and went numb. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, like they were made of water. I collapsed onto the sofa. The room dissolved into blurred shapes and distant sounds, as if I were sinking underwater. Then Evelyn appeared. My daughter stepped into view, holding a clipboard and a stack of papers. Her face hovered above me, her voice echoing strangely as if it were traveling through water. "Dad," she said urgently. "Dad, the doctor needs you to sign this. It's for your insurance. We might have to take you to the hospital. Just sign right here." She placed a pen in my trembling hand. I couldn't read the documents. The letters swam across the page like insects crawling across glass. My vision wouldn't focus. But Evelyn gently guided my hand to the line. I trusted her. She was my daughter. So I signed. Back in the present, I stared through the windshield of my car, the memory burning in my chest. "You poisoned me," I whispered quietly to the empty dashboard. "You and your mother poisoned me." Gregory's voice came through the phone with cold amusement. "We sedated you," he corrected casually. "You were agitated. We helped you calm down. Honestly, Frank, you should be grateful. We took the burden of managing your finances off your shoulders. You're getting old. You're confused. You forget things." "I do not forget this," I said flatly. "Well, you better start getting used to your new reality," Gregory replied smugly, "because we didn't just move the money. We made a few phone calls before leaving." My grip tightened around the steering wheel. "What calls?" I asked. "We contacted Adult Protective Services this morning," he said. "Told them you've been wandering around and acting unstable. We explained you're a danger to yourself. We also mentioned your dementia." A chill ran down my spine. They didn't just want my money, they wanted me erased. "An ambulance should be arriving at your house any minute now," Gregory continued. "We already reserved a bed for you at the state facility in Jackson. Everything is arranged. You'll be safe there. 3 meals a day and a nice window to stare out of." He paused, then added casually, "Oh, and the house is already listed for sale. We should have the payment by the time we return from Europe." In the background, I heard Teresa laughing. "Tell him thank you for the upgrade, Gregory," she shouted loudly. "This seat massages my back." Finally, the old man is useful for something. Then they all laughed, the sound echoed through the phone. 3 predators celebrating their victory somewhere high above the Atlantic, sipping champagne paid for with 40 years of my work. I stared through the windshield as my car rolled slowly down Elm Street. My house was only 2 blocks away. As I turned the corner, I saw them. A white van with the state seal was parked directly in my driveway. Behind it stood an ambulance with its lights quietly flashing. 2 EMTs in uniform and a woman in a beige suit holding a clipboard were standing on my porch, knocking firmly on the front door. They were there. They were actually there. They had come to collect the package. They had come to take the senile, confused old man and lock him away in a state-run warehouse where he could rot while his family spent his life savings on designer bags and French wine. Gregory was still talking on the phone, rambling about how they were going to renovate their kitchen with the rest of the money. But I stopped listening. I looked at the house. Eleanor's rose bushes were blooming by the porch. I had painted those shutters last summer. That house was my life, and there were strangers on the porch ready to take me away from it forever. If I stopped, if I got out of the car, they would take me. They had the paperwork. They had the power of attorney. They had the lies about my mental state. I would be sedated and institutionalized before the sun went down. I did not hit the brakes. I kept my foot steady on the gas. I drove past my own driveway. I saw the social worker turn her head, looking at my car as I passed, but she didn't recognize me. She was looking for the confused old man inside the house, not a focused driver on the street. I watched my home disappear in the rearview mirror. I watched the life I knew vanish around the bend. I am not senile Gregory, I said into the phone, my voice low and dangerous. And I am not going to any facility. Oh yeah, Gregory challenged. Where are you going to go? You have no money. You have no home. You are nothing. I am a structural engineer, I said, and I know exactly where the load-bearing walls are in your life. I hung up the phone. I didn't throw it. I placed it gently on the seat. I had $12 in the bank. I had a half tank of gas. I had the clothes on my back. And I had a rage that burned hotter than any forge I had ever worked in. I wasn't going to the police. The police would look at the power of attorney and tell me it was a civil matter. They would see the report from the family, claiming I was mentally unstable, and they would hand me over to the social workers. No, this required a different kind of intervention. I drove toward the highway. I knew exactly where I was going. I was going to see Victoria Croft. She was the toughest lawyer in the county, a woman who ate sharks for breakfast. And I was going to trigger a clause in the trust fund that my daughter didn't even know existed. They believed they had already won. In their minds, the game was finished the moment they seized the king. But they forgot something important about strategy. Sometimes a single pawn placed carefully and moved at the right moment can bring down an entire empire. I merged onto the interstate and headed toward downtown Los Angeles. The sun was beginning to set, stretching long shadows across the highway like dark fingers. My spank growled loudly, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything since the day before. The hunger was sharp, almost painful, but I welcomed it. Hunger keeps a man alert. It keeps his mind focused. Enjoy Paris, I murmured to the empty car, because by the time this is over, it will be the most expensive vacation you've ever taken. The highway stretched ahead of me like a gray ribbon, disappearing into the horizon. My hands rested steadily on the steering wheel, but inside my mind calculations were racing. Variables, contingencies, structural pressure points, moving faster than most people could follow. I was on my way to Victoria Croft's office, but as I passed exit 42, a sudden realization struck me like a cable snapping under tension. I couldn't show up at Victoria's office empty-handed. I needed the blueprints. In construction, you never begin a demolition without the original schematics. You must know exactly where the gas lines run. You must understand which columns hold the weight of the building and which ones are merely decorative. Evelyn and Gregory believed they had stripped me of everything, every document, every dollar, every ounce of leverage. But they were amateurs. They saw the surface of the structure and assumed they understood the entire building. What they didn't know was that the real foundation was hidden underground. They had never seen the sub. I took the next exit, looped around, and headed back toward my house. When I turned onto Elm Street again, the ambulance was still there. Its emergency lights pulsing silently, flashes of red and white reflecting off the trees like a slow heartbeat. Curious neighbors peeked through their curtains, drawn toward the commotion like moths circling a bright lamp. I pulled my sedan behind the white van marked with the seal of Adult Protective Services and turned off the engine. For a moment, I sat still, breathing slowly. The faint smell of old air conditioning filled the car, mixed with something else, determination. Then I stepped out. The woman in the beige suit noticed me first. She tapped one of the EMTs on the shoulder and pointed in my direction. Both men turned toward me, their expressions blending professional concern with quiet authority. They had expected someone very different, a wandering old man, a confused patient who couldn't remember the date or his own address. "Mr. Vance," the woman called as she approached. Her voice carried the soft, exaggerated tone people use with children or overly friendly dogs. "I'm Melissa from Adult Protective Services." Your family is very concerned about you. I straightened to my full height. Even at 70 years old, I still stand 6'2" and tall. 40 years spent walking steel beams 500 feet above the ground has a way of teaching a man to keep his spine straight. Gravity doesn't forgive sloppy posture. My family, I replied calmly, is currently drinking champagne somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean on a Boeing 747, Melissa. I met her eyes. They're not worried about me. They're celebrating. She blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard by my composure. Her gaze shifted down to the clipboard in her hands before returning to my face. We received a report stating that you've been suffering from severe dementia, she explained carefully. According to the report, you've been wandering the streets and may be a danger to yourself. We've been authorized to transport you to the Jackson State Facility for evaluation. Without speaking, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. From inside, I removed a business card and handed it to her. It was my consulting card. I'm a structural engineer, Melissa, I said evenly. Right now, I'm consulting on the retrofit of the suspension bridge downtown. Yesterday morning, I submitted a 40-page report to the City Council outlining tensile stress distribution. I tilted my head slightly. Tell me something, I asked. Dunce. A man with advanced dementia calculate load distribution for a 20-ton bridge. Is this conversation helpful so far? She took the card. She looked at it, then at me, her brow furrowed. Sir, your daughter has power of attorney. She claims you have been hallucinating. My daughter has a shopping addiction and a husband who has never held a job for more than 6 months, I countered. I unlocked my phone and brought up my email. Here is the timestamp on my report sent yesterday at 8 a.m. Here is the reply from the city engineer thanking me for my clarity. Ask me anything, Melissa. Ask me who the president is. Ask me to count backward from 100 by sevens. Ask me the square root of 1 and 44. I waited. The EMTs shifted uncomfortably. They were used to tragedy, not competence. Melissa sighed. She looked at the house, then at the ambulance. She was a bureaucrat, but she was not stupid. She saw the new car in the driveway that Gregory had bought last month. She saw my old sedan. She saw a man who was articulate and sharp. Mr. Vance, she said, dropping the patronizing tone, if you are lucid, I cannot force you into the ambulance against your will. The report claimed you were nonverbal and combative. Clearly that is not the case. Thank you, I said, reaching for my house keys. But sir, Melissa said, stepping in front of me, you need to understand something. The power of attorney is still legally valid until a judge revokes it. Your daughter has listed this property for emergency liquidation. The realtor is on the way over to change the locks. I froze. Listed. They had not just stolen the cash. They were selling the foundation from under my feet. Technically, she continued, her voice softening with pity. You do not have the right to reside here. If the owner of record, which is now your daughter, acting as your proxy, has ordered the sale. I can leave, but you cannot stay here tonight. If you go inside, you are trespassing. I looked at the house. My house. I thought about the evenings I sat on that porch with Eleanor watching the fireflies. I thought about the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame measuring Evelyn's height. I understand the legalities, Melissa, I said. I just need to retrieve my personal effects, my medication, my clothes. Surely you will not deny an old man his heart pills. She hesitated. Then she nodded. 5 minutes, Mr. Vance. Then we all have to clear out. I walked past her. I walked past the EMTs. I put my key in the lock. It turned with a familiar heavy click. The house smelled of lemon pledge and emptiness. They had already been here. The television was gone. The silver candlesticks Eleanor loved were gone. The paintings had been taken off the walls, leaving pale rectangular ghosts on the wallpaper. They had stripped the place of anything they could pawn quickly. I did not cry. Crying is for when you are hurt. I was not hurt anymore. I was in assessment mode. I was looking for the structural flaw. I walked straight to my study. They had ravaged this room too. The computer was gone. The drawers of my desk had been pulled out and dumped on the floor. Papers were everywhere. Invoices, receipts, old birthday cards. They had looked for money. They had looked for bonds. They had looked for anything obvious. But Gregory and Evelyn were surface-level people. They looked at the drywall and thought that was the house. They never checked the joists. Before I show you what I found, that changed everything. Comment 1 below so I know you're still here with me in this story. Also, a quick heads up. The next part includes some fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. If that's not something you enjoy, feel free to stop watching here. I knelt down on the floor in the corner of the room, behind where the heavy oak filing cabinet used to be. The cabinet was gone, sold probably, but the rug remained. I pulled the corner of the oriental rug back. Underneath were the oak floorboards. To the naked eye, they looked seamless, but I had laid this floor myself 30 years ago. I pressed my thumb against the third knot from the wall and applied 40 pounds of pressure. Click. A section of the floorboard popped up half an inch. It was a spring-loaded mechanism, simple, mechanical, and invisible, unless you knew the exact pressure point. I lifted the false board. Underneath, nestled between the floor joists, was a steel fireproof box. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. My hands did not shake as I spun the combination dial, right to 30, left to 14, right to 82. The tumblers clicked into place with a sound that felt like a heavy door slamming shut on my daughter's future. I opened the box. It was all there, the deed to the house in my name, the original life insurance policies, and most importantly, a thick blue binder labeled the Vance Family Trust. I pulled the binder out. I opened it to page 14. The text was dense, full of legal jargon that I had clear as throat paid Victoria Croft $5,000 to write up 10 years ago. Evelyn knew the trust existed. She knew she was the beneficiary. That was why she felt so confident draining the accounts. She thought the trust was just a pot of money waiting for her. But she had never read the bylaws. She had never read Clause 14b. I read the text aloud in the empty echoing room, my voice bouncing off the bare walls. In the event of the grantor's incapacitation or death, control of assets shall pass to the beneficiary. However, he was wrong should any asset be withdrawn from the primary holding accounts prior to the certified death of the grantor without the counter-signature of the appointed trust protector. Such withdrawal shall be classified as an immediate taxable distribution and shall trigger the immediate dissolution of the asset protection shield. Under California law, this unauthorized transfer also constitutes elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code, paragraph 610.30, as it deprives a senior citizen of their essential life support funds. Furthermore, any attempt to use a forged or coerced power of attorney to execute this transfer constitutes a direct violation of California Penal Code, Section 470 forgery, rendering the entire transaction void ab initio, meaning it is legally null and void from its inception. The facilitating party shall be immediately liable for the full tax burden, plus a 40% early withdrawal penalty. I smiled. It was a cold smile. Evelyn had used the power of attorney to bypass the bank's security, but the money she moved was trust money, by moving it without the trust protector's signature. And I was the trust protector. She had unwittingly reclassified $850,000 from a tax-exempt inheritance into immediate taxable income. She didn't just steal my money, she had just handed herself a tax bill for nearly $400,000 due immediately. And because she had moved the money across international lines to fund a vacation, she had technically committed wire fraud against the trust. I closed the binder. I tucked it under my arm. I stood up and walked out of the study. I walked out of the house. I walked past Melissa, who was checking her watch. I have what I need, I told her. I got into my car. I put the binder on the passenger seat. It looked innocuous, just a blue folder, but it was a demolition charge. I pulled my phone out and dialed Victoria Croft. She answered on the first ring. "Victoria," I said, my voice steady. "It is Frank? Frank?" She sounded worried. "I tried calling you. I saw some strange activity alerts on the trust monitoring system. Are you okay?" "I am fine, Victoria," I said. "But we have a situation." Evelyn activated the power of attorney. She drained the accounts. She is in Paris. There was a silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "She drained the trust accounts without your countersignature." "Every penny," I confirmed. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered. "Audrey's Frank. She just triggered Clause 14b. The IRS obnated systems are going to flag that withdrawal within 48 hours. "I know," I said. "That is why I am calling. I want you to initiate Protocol Genesis." Genesis was our code word. It meant the nuclear option. It meant we were not just letting the IRS handle it. It meant we were actively assisting them. It meant filing an immediate lien against any assets purchased with the stolen funds. Frank. Victoria warned, her voice serious. If we do this, there is no going back. This will destroy her credit. It will freeze her assets. It could send her to prison. She is your daughter. I looked at the empty house. I looked at the ambulance that had come to take me away to a warehouse for the forgotten. She ceased being my daughter when she signed the papers to have me committed. Victoria, I said, she is just a defendant now. Execute the protocol. I hung up the phone. I put the car in gear and drove away from my home for the last time. I had no roof over my head. I had $12, but I had the blueprints and the demolition had just begun. I walked into Victoria Croft's law office 20 minutes later. The air conditioning was humming, and the smell of old paper and expensive coffee filled the room. Victoria sat behind her mahogany desk, looking at the blue binder I had placed in front of her. She was wearing her reading glasses, the ones she only put on when she was looking for a loophole or closing a trap. She flipped through the pages, her finger tracing the lines of the trust agreement. "So let me get this straight, Frank," she said without looking up. "Huh. Satas Evelyn used the power of attorney to transfer the entire balance of the trust's holding account into a personal checking account, jointly held by her and Gregory." That is correct," I said, sitting in the leather chair opposite her. My hands were folded in my lap. I felt remarkably calm, like the quiet before a controlled explosion. Victoria took off her glasses and looked at me. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of horror and professional admiration. "Do they have any idea what they just did?" "No," I replied. "They think they just robbed a piggy bank. They do not understand the tax code." Victoria laughed, a sharp barking sound. "They certainly do not bend. This is catastrophic for them. The trust was set up as an irrevocable dynasty trust. The funds are tax-exempt only if they remain within the trust structure or are used for specific qualified expenses like healthcare or education. By moving the funds to a personal account for personal use, specifically a luxury vacation, and paying off a mortgage, they have triggered a taxable event." She grabbed a calculator and started punching in numbers. The keys clacked loudly in the quiet office. "Okay, here's the damage," Victoria said. "The $850,000 is now considered immediate taxable income for this fiscal year. That puts them in the highest federal tax bracket, which is 37% plus state taxes. But here is the kicker. Because they violated the terms of the trust, there is an aeonatic early withdrawal penalty and a breach of fiduciary duty fine mandated by the IRS code attached to this specific trust vehicle. That is another 40%. I did the math in my head. Structural engineers are good with numbers. So they owe the government roughly 77% of what they stole," I said. Victoria nodded. "Give or take. And the IRS does not care that they spent the money on champagne and first-class tickets. The tax bill is due immediately upon the transaction being flagged. If they cannot pay it, the IRS will garnish their wages, seize their assets, and put a lien on every piece of property they own for the next 20 years. She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to tell her to call the police. That was the standard procedure: theft, fraud, elder abuse. "Now, shall I call the district attorney?" Victoria asked, reaching for her phone. Between the elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code 16130 and the California Penal Code Section 470 forgery, which makes their power of attorney transaction void ab initio, we have more than enough to put them away. On top of that, Gregory has been using your trust money for his own personal gains, which is a textbook case of dissipation of marital assets. And let's not forget the prenuptial agreement we had Gregory sign before he married Evelyn. It contains a strict prenuptial agreement infidelity clause, and my private investigator just confirmed. Gregory has been having an affair with his office assistant. Under the prenuptial agreement infidelity clause, this breach means Gregory is completely stripped of any right to Evelyn's assets and must assume all marital debts himself. I smiled coldly. "No, put the phone down, Victoria. Let the IRS and the debt collection hit them first. If we arrest them now, they get a public defender. They get a plea deal. They get to play the victim and say they were just trying to care for their senile father and made a mistake. A jury might even feel sorry for them. No, I do not want them in handcuffs. Not yet." I leaned forward. "I want them crushed, Victoria. I want them to feel the weight of the bureaucracy. I want them to wake up every morning for the rest of their lives, wondering which government agency is going to take their toaster I want them to be ground down into dust by the relentless machinery of the United States tax code. Report the transaction to the IRS. File the suspicious activity report with the Treasury Department. Let the auditors loose. Victoria smiled a slow, dangerous smile. She liked it. It was vicious. It was clean. It was legal. Consider it done, she said, making a note on her legal pad. Now, what about your living situation? We need to get you access to some funds. I can file an emergency motion to freeze the accounts, but that will take a few days. I have $12, Victoria, I said. I will be fine for a few days, but there is one more thing. I reached into my briefcase, the battered leather bag that had carried my lunch and my blueprints for 40 years. I pulled out a thin manila folder. It was labeled Simply Project Aegis. I slid it across the desk to her. "What is this?" Victoria asked, opening it. 2 years ago, Gregory's construction company was going under, I explained. He had overextended himself on a development deal in the suburbs. He owed creditors nearly $200,000. He was going to lose his house. He was going to lose everything. Evelyn came to me crying. She didn't ask for money directly, but she told me how scared she was. I didn't tell her I helped. I continued. I knew Gregory's pride. If I had given him the money, he would have resented me. And frankly, I knew he was bad with money. So I did something else. I set up a shell company, Vanguard Holdings. Victoria's eyes scanned the documents in the folder. Her eyebrows shot up. "You bought his debt," she whispered. "State, I bought the distressed notes from the bank for 60 cents on the dollar," I confirmed. "I own his business loans. I own the lien on his equipment. I am Vanguard Holdings. For 2 years, he has been making minimum interest payments to a P.O. box, thinking he was lucky the bank sold his debt to a lenient investor. He missed a payment last month," I said, "and now he has left the country." With Victoria looked up at me, and for the first time she looked a little afraid. "Frank, do you realize what this means?" "I do," I said. "The terms of the loan agreement are standard. If the borrower engages in criminal activity, or attempts to flee the jurisdiction, or if the collateral is at risk, the lender has the right to call the full value of the loan immediately." Immediate debt call. Victoria said the legal term, hanging heavy in the air. "Gregory is in Paris spending my money." I said, "That is flight. He is using the proceeds of a crime. That is criminal activity. And he is depleting his liquidity, which puts my collateral at risk." I picked up a pen from Victoria's desk. It was a heavy, expensive pen. It felt like a weapon. "Draft the letter. Victoria, Vanguard Holdings is calling the debt. He owes $200. Zeros and payable within 24 hours. If he does not pay, we seize everything, the trucks, the tools, and since he put his house up as secondary collateral, we seize that too." "But Frank," Victoria said, her voice hushed, "if we do this and the IRS freezes his assets and you seize the house, they will have nothing. They will be homeless. They will be bankrupt." I looked out the window of her office. I could see the city skyline, the buildings I had helped build. Steel and concrete do not care about your feelings. They only care about physics. If you remove the support, the structure falls. They tried to put me in a state facility. "Victoria," I said. "They tried to take my home. They left me with $12. They did not care if I was homeless. They did not care if I died." I uncapped the pen. "Gregory always wanted to be a big shot," I said, signing my name at the bot Frank of the authorization form. "He always wanted to play in the big leagues." "Well, welcome to the big leagues, Gregory." I pushed the paper back to her. "Execute the order," I said. "Seize the house." Victoria looked at the signature. Then she looked at me. She nodded slowly. She picked up her phone. "I will get the writ of attachment filed this afternoon," she said. "The sheriff will post the notice on their door by sunset. By the time they wake up in Paris, they will be trespassing in their own home." "Thank you, Victoria," I said. Standing up, I walked to the door. I had no money for a cab. I would have to walk to the shelter or sleep in my car. But as I walked out of that air-conditioned office onto the hot pavement, I didn't feel poor. I felt powerful. I had just pulled the pin on a grenade and rolled it into their first-class cabin. All I had to do now was wait for the boom. While I was trying to find a comfortable position in the back seat of my sedan, parked in a 24-hour supermarket lot 4 away, the sun was setting over the city of lights. It was 8:00 in the evening in Paris. The air was cool and smelled of expensive perfume and the exhaust of vintage cars. My daughter Evelyn, her husband Gregory, and his mother Teresa were walking through the gilded revolving doors of the Ritz Paris. They were entering a world they believed they belonged in, a world of unlimited credit and zero consequences. They did not know that the ground beneath their feet had already liquefied. They were walking on air, and gravity was about to file a complaint. They were seated at one of the best tables in the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant. The room was a palace of gold leaf mirrors and velvet curtains. A harpist was playing something soft and classical in the corner. The other diners were oil tycoons, diplomats, and old European money people who knew how to be rich quietly. My family, on the other hand, was loud. They were drunk on the adrenaline of theft. They ordered everything. They started with Oetetra caviar, the kind that cost more per ounce than gold. They ordered the foie gras tin with a fig reduction. They ordered the blue lobster caught off the coast of Evelyn. They ordered the Wagyu beef flown in from Japan and the wine. Gregory ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux, vintage 2005. The sous-mayor raised an eyebrow, but Gregory just waved his hand dismissively. "Bring two," Gregory said loud enough for the table next to them to hear. "We are celebrating a merger." It was not a merger, it was a liquidation. My liquidation. I can imagine the conversation perfectly. I know them. I know their greed. I know how they feed off each other. "To new beginnings," Evelyn said, raising her crystal glass. The diamonds on her fingers sparkled under the chandelier. Light diamonds bought with the credit card that was linked to the account she had just drained. "To freedom," Teresa chimed in, clinking her glass against Evelyn's. She was wearing a new silk scarf, probably Hermes, that she had picked up at the airport duty-free. "You look so relaxed, dear," Teresa continued. "The stress lines are gone. Living with that old man was aging you. He was just so negative." Evelyn sighed, picking at her lobster. "Always talking about saving, always talking about rainy days. He never understood that you have to enjoy life while you can. He was a weight around our necks." "Well, the weight is gone now," Gregory said, grinning. His mouth was full of steak. He swallowed and took a large gulp of wine. "I checked the tracking on the ambulance. The transfer to the state facility should be complete by now. He is probably sitting in the common room, eating green jello and watching Wheel of Fortune." They all laughed, a cruel, jagged sound that cut through the polite murmur of the restaurant. "It is for the best," Teresa said, wiping a speck of sauce from her lip. He was losing his mind. "You did the responsible thing, Evelyn. You made the hard choice, and look at the reward." She gestured around the room at the gold and the crystal. "Speaking of rewards," Gregory said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "I was looking at real estate listings on the flight over. Since we have the liquidity now, why stop at a vacation? Why not an investment? There is a villa in the south of France near Nice, 6 bedrooms, a pool overlooking the Mediterranean. It is a distress sale. We could pick it up for a steel renovate and flip it in 2 years for double." Evelyn's eyes lit up. "A villa, Austin Gregory. That sounds amazing. We could spend our summers there. I could finally start my painting again. And I could have the guest cottage," Teresa added quickly. "I have always wanted to retire in France. The air is so much better for my constitution." "We will call the agent Bonoro," Gregory promised grandly. "We will put down a cash deposit. We have the funds. Thanks to Frank." They toasted again to my name, to the man whose life they had dismantled to buy a fantasy. They ate until they were stuffed. They drank until their cheeks were flushed. They ordered dessert, a chocolate soul that had to be ordered 30 minutes in advance. They sat there, bloated and happy, convinced that they had won the game of life. Then the bill came. It arrived on a small silver tray, discreet, and folded in heavy cream paper. Gregory snatched it up before the waiter could even step back. He wanted to see the number. He wanted to feel the power of paying it. He opened the folder. He whistled. 4,200, he announced proudly. "Not bad for a Tuesday night." "Let me get this one, babe," Evelyn said, reaching for her purse. "It is my treat." "No, no," Gregory said, waving her off. "I want to use the corporate card. I need the points for the status upgrade. Besides, I am the man of the house now. I should pay for the ladies." He reached into his wallet. He bypassed the debit cards and the standard credit cards. He pulled out a sleek, heavy card made of black anodized titanium. It was the American Express Centurion card issued to his construction company, the card he used to impress his friends. The card that was backed by the line of credit I had secretly purchased 2 years ago under Vanguard Holdings. He placed the black card on the silver tray with a flourish. "Add 20% for yourself," Gregory told the waiter with a wink. Service was acceptable. The waiter, a man in a pristine white tuxedo jacket, bowed slightly. "Mercy, monsieur." He took the tray and walked away toward the payment terminal near the entrance. Gregory leaned back in his chair, linking his hands behind his head. "I love this city," he declared. "I feel like I was born to live here. Maybe we should look at apartments in Paris, too." A pied-à-terre. "Why choose?" Teresa giggled. "Get both. We can afford it." They chatted about curtains and upholstery for the imaginary villa. They did not look at the waiter station. They did not see the waiter swipe the card. They did not see the waiter frown. They did not see him swipe it again. They did not see him pick up the phone and dial the authorization center. If they had been looking, they would have seen the color drain from the waiter's face. They would have seen the manager, a stern man with a mustache, step over and look at the terminal screen. They would have seen the manager nod once sharp and definitive. 5 minutes passed, then 10. "What is taking so long?" Gregory grumbled, checking his watch. "It is a simple transaction. Do they not know who I am?" "Maybe they are admiring the card," Teresa suggested. "They probably do not see many black cards." Gregory chuckled. "True, it is an exclusive club." Then the manager approached the table. He was not smiling. He was flanked by the waiter and 2 large men in dark suits who had been standing by the door. The music seemed to stop. The conversation at the nearby tables died down as the other diners sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Gregory looked up expecting an apology for the delay. He expected a complimentary cognac. "Is there a problem?" Gregory asked, annoyed. The manager stopped at the edge of the table. He held the black titanium card in his hand. He did not offer it back. He held it like it was a piece of contaminated evidence. "Monsieur," the manager said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent dining room. "I'm afraid there is a significant problem," Gregory scoffed. "Do not tell me the machine is broken, just run it manually." "The limit is endless. The card has been declined," the manager said. Gregory laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "Declined? That is impossible. That is a Centurion card. Run it again. We have run it 3 times." The manager said, his face like stone. "And we have spoken to the issuing bank in the United States. They have instructed us to confiscate this card immediately." Confiscate. Gregory stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "You cannot do that. That is my property. Give it back." The manager took a step back, placing the card in his pocket. The 2 security guards stepped forward, crossing their arms. "The bank informed us that the corporate accounts associated with this card have been frozen due to a writ of attachment filed this afternoon." The manager stated loud enough for the oil tycoons and the diplomats to hear every word. "They reported that the company is in default and the assets have been seized due to bankruptcy and suspected fraud." "Bankruptcy?" Teresa shrieked, clutching her pearls. "What are you talking about?" "My son is a wealthy developer. Fraud." Evelyn whispered, her face turning the color of the white tablecloth. The bank was quite specific, Madame." The manager continued, his voice dripping with icy politeness. "This card is invalid. The account is legally seized, and therefore we cannot accept it as payment." He looked down at the bill on the tray. "You have a balance of $4,200, the manager said. "We require an alternative form of payment immediately, or we will be forced to contact the Gendarmerie." Gregory looked around the room. Every eye was on him. The envy he had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a collective look of amusement and disdain. He was not a tycoon anymore. He was a fraud, a broke American trying to play king. "Here," Gregory stammered, his hand shaking as he reached into his wallet. "Try this one. It is a Visa personal account." He handed over another card. The manager took it and handed it to the waiter, who ran to the machine. Teresa was fanning herself with a napkin. "This is a mistake, Gregory. Fix this. This is humiliating. It is just a banking error." "Mom," Gregory said, sweat beading on his forehead. "I moved some money around before we left. The wires probably got crossed. It is fine." The waiter returned. He shook his head. "Declined." The waiter said. "Marked as lost or stolen." Gregory tried a MasterCard. Declined. Evelyn opened her purse, her hands trembling so hard she dropped her lipstick. "Try mine," she said, pulling out the debit card linked to the trust fund money, the card she had used to steal my life. There is almost $1 million on this one, she hissed at the manager. Run it. The waiter took it. He ran it. He came back. Declined, he said. Account frozen by the Internal Revenue Service for suspicious activity. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. The IRS, Evelyn squeaked. The manager sighed. He snapped his fingers. The two security guards moved closer, boxing them in. It appears you have no means to pay for your dinner, the manager said. This is theft of services. We are staying at the hotel. Gregory shouted, desperate. Put it on the room. We are in the royal suite. Ah, yes, the manager said. We checked your room reservation as well. The credit card used to secure the suite has also been flagged as fraudulent. The hotel management is currently packing your belongings. You are no longer guests here. Teresa let out a low moan and slumped in her chair. Evelyn started to cry, tears streaming down her face and ruining her makeup. Gregory looked like he was about to vomit. You have 5 minutes to produce cash, the manager said, checking his watch, or the police will escort you to the station. And in France, monsieur, we take dining and dashing very seriously. Gregory looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Teresa. Teresa looked at the empty lobster shells. They had no cash. They never carried cash. They were modern people, digital people, and now they were broke people. I sat in my car 4,000 meters away, staring at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 8:30 p.m. in Paris. The show was just beginning. I imagined the waiter's voice. I imagined Gregory's face. I opened my glove compartment and took out a small packet of beef jerky. It was my dinner. It cost $2. It tasted better than any lobster in the world. The silence in the Michelin-starred restaurant was heavy enough to crush a diamond. Gregory stood there with his wallet turned inside out, spilling a rainbow of credit cards onto the pristine white tablecloth. There was a Platinum Visa, a World Elite MasterCard, an airline rewards card that he had bragged about getting just last month. He was sweating profusely now, the perspiration soaking through his expensive dress shirt and making the fabric cling to his skin like a second layer of panic. Try this one, Gregory stammered, shoving the Platinum Visa at the waiter. It has a $50,000 limit. I just paid it off. The waiter took the card with 2 fingers as if it were a dirty tissue. He walked to the terminal. He inserted the chip. The machine hummed for a second, a cruel mechanical pause that offered a sliver of hope before the screen turned a bright, angry red. Declined, the waiter said flatly, returning the card. Try the MasterCard, Gregory insisted, his voice rising an octave. It has to work. It did not work. Then he tried the airline card, then the gas card, then the debit card from a secret account he thought I didn't know about. Declined, declined, declined. It was a symphony of rejection. What they did not understand was the nature of the trap I had sprung. When I called the bank to report the fraudulent activity on my trust account, I did not just flag a single transaction. I flagged the identities associated with the theft. I reported a massive cross-border financial crime involving identity theft and elder abuse. In the United States banking system, when a social security number is flagged for that level of fraud, the security algorithms go nuclear. They do not just freeze one account. They freeze everything linked to that identity to prevent money laundering and capital flight. Gregory and Evelyn were radioactive. Every computer system in the Western world now saw them as high-risk criminals. Evelyn, Gregory hissed, turning to my daughter. Give me your card, the one with the trust money. Evelyn fumbled with her clutch, her fingers slipping on the clasp. She pulled out the card, the plastic key to the $850,000 she had stolen from me. But this has to work. She whispered more to herself than to the room. It is cash. It is liquid. She handed it to the manager. He swiped it. Authorized? She asked. Hopeful. Seized? The manager corrected. This card has been flagged by the United States Department of the Treasury. Evelyn let out a small, choked sound like a balloon losing air. She looked at Gregory. Gregory looked at the floor. Teresa, who had been fanning herself with a menu, suddenly stopped. Her eyes darted around the room, realizing that the walls were closing in. We will go to the hotel safe, Teresa announced, standing up with as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much. We have cash in the room, thousands of euros. We will go get it and come back. The manager stepped in front of her, blocking her path. I'm afraid I cannot allow you to leave, madame, not without collateral. We have had guests try I will fetch the cash routine before. They usually run out the back door. We are not criminals, Teresa shrieked. The declined cards suggest otherwise, the manager replied coolly. You have a bill of $4,200. If you cannot pay it right now, I will press this button and the gendarme will be here in 3 minutes. Theft of services and fraud are serious offenses in France. You will spend the night in a cell. The word cell hung in the air. I could practically smell their fear across the ocean. Gregory looked at the security guards. He looked at the exit. He realized he wasn't fast enough. Teresa looked down at her wrist. She was wearing a Rolex Detail, just solid gold with a diamond bezel. She had bought it yesterday at the airport in New York, using the very first withdrawal from my account. It cost $12,000. Take the watch. Teresa spat. Unbuckling the clasp with trembling fingers, she slammed it onto the table. It is worth 3 times the bill. Take it and let us leave. The manager picked up the watch. He inspected it under the light, checking the movement, checking the weight. He nodded. And the ring, he added, pointing to the 2-carat diamond solitaire on her finger. Not another purchase from yesterday for the inconvenience and the tip for my staff. You are robbing me, Teresa screamed. I am negotiating a settlement to avoid your arrest, the manager said. The ring, madame, or the police. Teresa looked at Gregory, expecting him to defend her. Gregory looked away. He was a coward. He would sell his own mother to avoid a night in a French jail. Give him the ring, Mom, Gregory mumbled. We have more money in the safe. We will buy another one, Bonor. With a sob of pure rage, Teresa yanked the ring off her finger and threw it at the manager. We are leaving, she announced, storming toward the door, and we are never coming back to this dump. Gregory and Evelyn scrambled after her heads down, trying to avoid the gaze of the other diners who were watching the spectacle with undisguised amusement. They ran out of the restaurant and into the lobby of the Ritz. They needed to regroup. They needed to get to the room. They had stashed €5, Zuzone in cash in the room safe. Earlier that day, a little emergency fund they had withdrawn for shopping at the flea markets. Euros 5,000 would get them a hotel somewhere else. It would buy them food. It would buy them time to figure out why the banks were malfunctioning. They did not know it wasn't a malfunction. They did not know it was an execution. They sprinted across the lobby, past the concierge desk, past the displays of jewelry they could no longer afford. They reached the elevators. Gregory jammed the button. Clear's throat. Come on, he muttered, bouncing on his heels. When the doors opened, they piled in. Evelyn was crying softly again. My watch, Teresa was moaning. He took my Rolex. That old man is going to pay for this. When I get back, I am going to put him in the basement. I am going to feed him dog food. They reached their floor. The hallway was lined with thick plush carpet that swallowed the sound of their frantic footsteps. They ran to the end of the hall to the double doors of the royal suite. We get the cash, we check out. We go to the Four Seasons. Gregory panted, pulling the key card from his pocket. He slid the card into the slot. Usually there was a satisfying green light and the click of the lock disengaging. This time the light flashed red. Beep. Gregory frowned. He wiped the card on his pants. He tried again. Red light. Beep. What is wrong with you? Teresa snapped, pushing him aside. Let me do it. She took her key card. She inserted it. Red light. Beep. Evelyn tried hers. Red light. It is demagnetized, Gregory said, panic creeping into his voice. All of them. No. A voice spoke from behind them. They are not demagnetized. They have been deactivated. They spun around. Standing at the end of the hallway, blocking the path to the elevators, was the general manager of the hotel. He was a tall man with impeccable posture and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. Flanking him were 2 large men in security uniforms. They were not smiling. They were not offering room service. They were standing with their hands clasped in front of them, creating a human wall. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, the general manager said, his voice calm but projecting authority. And Mrs. Kingsley, I'm afraid there has been a development regarding your reservation. Open this door, Gregory shouted, trying to bluster his way through the fear. We have cash inside. The safe has been emptied by our security team under the supervision of the local authorities, the manager said, holding up a sealed plastic bag containing their stack of euros. This cash has been seized as partial payment for the room charges you have incurred but failed to secure. Seized? Evelyn gasped. The credit card on file was reported as stolen and used fraudulently, the manager explained. We received a notification from the bank and a call from the U.S. Embassy. We do not harbor criminals in the Ritz Paris. Criminals? Teresa screeched. Do you know who we are? Yes, the manager said. We know exactly who you are. You are trespassers. Your luggage has been packed. It is waiting for you on the curb outside. He pointed down the hallway. You will leave the premises immediately. If you refuse, these gentlemen will assist you. And I must warn you, the police are already on their way to collect a statement regarding the credit card fraud. I suggest you are not here when they arrive. Gregory looked at the sealed bag of money in the manager's hand. It was their lifeline. It was their food. It was their shelter. That is our money. Gregory lunged forward, reaching for the bag. The security guard moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. He stepped in front of the manager and shoved Gregory back. Gregory stumbled and fell onto the plush carpet. Do not make this worse, monsieur. The guard growled. Evelyn looked at the closed door of the suite. Her clothes were in there, her chargers, her toiletries. My things, she wailed. On the curb. The manager repeated, pointing again. You have 2 minutes to vacate the floor before we physically remove you. Teresa looked at Gregory on the floor. She looked at the implacable wall of security. She looked at the red light on the door lock. For the first time since she had poisoned my soup, Teresa looked truly terrified. They had no watch, they had no ring, they had no cash, they had no room. They turned and walked toward the elevator. It was a long walk, the walk of people who had flown first class to paradise, only to find out that paradise has a strict no-losers policy. As the elevator doors closed on their faces, shutting out the sight of luxury they felt entitled to, I opened another packet of beef jerky in my car. They were heading down to the lobby, then out onto the street. It was raining in Paris now, a cold, steady drizzle, and they didn't even have an umbrella. It was 2 in the morning in Paris when the final eviction notice was served, not on paper, but with the physical force of a closing door. The general manager of the Ritz stood under the awning, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the hotel entrance. He looked at my family huddled on the wet pavement, like trash that had missed the bin. The bill for the room guarantee is $15,000 for the 3 nights you booked, he said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Plus the 4,000 for the dinner you attempted to steal since your credit facility has been revoked. We require immediate settlement in cash. We don't have $15,000 on us, Gregory shouted, his voice cracking. Who carries that kind of cash? Just let us back in. We will call the bank in the morning. It is a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, the manager replied, signaling to the doorman. The bank was very clear. Your assets are frozen. You are insolvent and the Ritz is not a homeless shelter. You have no ability to pay. Therefore, you have no reservation. He gestured to the sidewalks. Please leave the property immediately. If you attempt to re-enter the lobby, you will be arrested for trespassing. The heavy glass doors swung shut. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed in the empty street. They were alone. The Plonhomme is beautiful in the daylight, a square of elegant architecture and high-end jewelry stores. At 2 in the morning, in a driving rainstorm, it is a cold stone canyon. The rain was not a romantic drizzle. It was a cold, relentless sheet of water that soaked through their expensive clothes in seconds. They stood there surrounded by a mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage. The hotel staff had dumped their bags on the curb, 6 large hard-shell suitcases piled up like a barricade against reality. They were filled with designer clothes, shoes, and the souvenirs of a life they could no longer afford. But right now, they were just heavy waterproof bricks. Gregory tried to drag 2 of the cases under the scant shelter of a nearby bus stop overhang, but the wheels slipped on the wet cobblestones. He slipped, falling hard onto his hip, into a puddle of oily water. He screamed, a curse word that bounced off the silent facades of the surrounding buildings. Evelyn was shivering, her thin silk blouse clinging to her skin. Her hair, the hair she spent hundreds of dollars getting highlighted, was plastered to her skull. She looked at the closed doors of the hotel, clears throat, then at the dark, call an Uber, she yelled at Gregory. Just get us out of here. I can't, Gregory yelled back, struggling to stand up. The app is linked to the credit card. It won't let me book a ride without a valid payment method. Teresa was sitting on one of the suitcases, gasping for air. The cold, damp air had triggered her asthma. It started as a wheeze, a high-pitched whistling sound in her chest. "My spray," she choked out, clutching her throat. "Gregory, get my spray." Gregory scrambled to the pile of luggage. "Which bag is it in, Mom?" "The small one." Teresa wheezed. "The vanity case, the brown leather one." Gregory frantically started tossing bags aside. He checked the tags, he checked the zippers, he spun around, his eyes wild. "It is not here," Clear's throat, he said. "What do you mean it is not here?" Evelyn screamed. "Look harder." "I am looking," Gregory shouted back, kicking a large suitcase in frustration. "It is not here. The staff must have kept it, or they missed it when they packed us out." Teresa let out a terrifying gurgling sound. Her face was turning a pale shade of gray in the streetlights. She needed that inhaler. Without it, her airways were constricting, shutting down like a blocked pipe. "Go back in," Evelyn ordered. "Go get it." Gregory ran to the hotel doors. He pounded on the glass. "Hey," he screamed. "Hey, we need medication. My mother is sick." Inside the warm, golden lobby, the night porter looked up from his desk. He saw Gregory, wet and frantic, banging on the glass. He did not move. He had his orders. No re-entry. He simply looked down at his ledger and turned the page. They can't hear me." Gregory sobbed, leaning his forehead against the cold glass. "They won't open." Teresa was doubled over now, coughing spasmodically. The rain was washing the makeup off her face, revealing the terrified old woman underneath. Evelyn looked at her husband, useless and weeping against a door. She looked at her mother-in-law, gasping for life on a pile of luggage they couldn't move. She realized with a jolt of horror that they were going to die on this sidewalk. They were going to freeze, or Teresa was going to suffocate, and nobody cared. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was the only thing she had left that worked. The battery was at 12%. She didn't call the police. She didn't call an ambulance. In her panic, her mind reverted to the one safety net she had known her entire life. The one person who had always fixed everything. The one person she had betrayed. She dialed my number. I was sitting in my car in Los Angeles eating a piece of beef jerky when the phone rang. I saw the name on the screen, Evelyn. I let it ring twice. I took a sip of lukewarm water. I wanted her to feel the silence. I wanted her to wonder if I had finally cut the cord completely. Then I picked up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. "Dad," Evelyn screamed. Her voice was raw, distorted by the wind and the panic. "Dad, pick up. I am here, Evelyn," I said, my voice calm. "Dad, you have to help us," she shrieked. "We are on the street. It is raining and they kicked us out. They took everything. Teresa is having an asthma attack and her medicine is locked inside. She can't breathe. Dad." I listened to the sound of the rain in the background. I heard Gregory sobbing. I heard the wheezing rattle of Teresa's breath. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Evelyn yelled. "Unfreeze the cards right now. Transfer the money back. We need a hotel. We need a doctor. You are killing us. What the hell did you do?" I leaned back in my car seat. The fabric was worn, but it was dry. "I didn't do anything, Evelyn," I said. "You did this. You emptied the accounts. You signed the papers. You booked the flight. I am just the spectator." "You are a monster," she screamed. "How can you do this to your own family? We are going to die out here. You are not going to die." I said, "It is just rain and Teresa is resilient. She survived poisoning me with mushroom soup. She can survive a little cold air. She didn't poison you." Evelyn lied, but her voice wavered. "That was an accident, Dad. Please open the account just for an hour, just so we can get inside. I will pay you back. I swear." "Pay me back with what?" I asked. "The money you stole, that money is gone, Evelyn. The IRS has it now, or at least they have a claim on it. And the house, the bank has that." "What house?" she gasped. "Your house," I said. "Gregory's house. I called the loan, Evelyn. I am Vanguard Holdings. I foreclosed on you this afternoon. You are homeless on 2 continents. There was a silence on the line so profound it drowned out the rain. You own the loan," she whispered. "I own everything," I said. "I own the debt. I own the trust. I own the narrative. You thought I was a senile old man, Evelyn. You thought you could put me in a home and forget about me. But you forgot one thing." "What?" she sobbed. "You forgot that I built the roof you slept under," I said, "and I know how to take it down." Teresa let out a loud, desperate wee in the background. "Dad, please," Evelyn begged. "She is turning blue. Call the French emergency services." I suggested is 112. I said, "They have socialized medicine. It is free, unlike my bank account." You hate me, she cried. You really hate me. I don't hate you, Evelyn, I said. I am just disappointed, and I am teaching you a lesson. It is a hard lesson, but it is the only one you seem capable of learning. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the darkness. My heart was beating fast, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I pictured them on that sidewalk, the wet clothes, the useless luggage, the reality crashing down on them harder than the rain. They would call an ambulance. Teresa would survive. The French hospitals were good, but they would be stuck in the system. No passports because those were likely in the hotel safe too, or soaked in a bag. No money, no place to go. They were about to find out what it really meant to be helpless. I started my car, the engine purred. I had a meeting with a realtor in the morning to look at a new apartment, a place with a view, a place with no memories. I drove out of the parking lot, leaving the ghosts of my family behind in the rain. I sat at the small glass dining table in the furnished apartment I had rented just 3 hours earlier. It was not the Ritz Paris. It was a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a quiet building in downtown Los Angeles. But to me, it felt like a palace. The air was dry and warm, the lights were soft, and in front of me on a real ceramic plate sat a 16 Oz ribeye steak cooked medium rare with a side of garlic mashed potatoes. It was the first hot meal I had eaten in 4 months that did not come out of a can or a drive-through window. Across from me, Victoria Croft sat with a glass of the Cabernet Sauvignon I had picked up on the way over. She had come by to drop off the final paperwork for the debt call and to ensure I was settled. She looked tired, but satisfied the look of a gladiator who had just watched the lions enter the arena. My phone, which I had placed in the center of the table between the salt and pepper shakers, began to vibrate again. The screen lit up with a name I used to associate with pride, but now only associated with theft. Gregory. They were persistent. I had hung up on Evelyn only minutes ago, but desperation does not adhere to social cues. I looked at Victoria. She raised an eyebrow and took a sip of wine. Answer it, she said softly. Let them hear the truth. They need to understand that this is not a negotiation, it is a sentencing hearing. I tapped the speaker icon and answered the call. I did not say hello. I simply cut a piece of steak and put it in my mouth, savoring the juice and the heat. You think this is funny, old man? Gregory's voice exploded from the tiny speaker, distorted by rage and the poor connection. You think you can just leave us here? I'm going to sue you. Do you hear me? I am going to sue you for every penny you have. I will have you declared incompetent, so fast your head will spin. I swallowed my food slowly. I took a sip of water. You're going to have a hard time hiring a lawyer, Gregory, I said, my voice calm and steady. Lawyers generally require a retainer, and as of 3 this afternoon, you do not have a bank account. You do not even have a credit score. Shut up, Gregory screamed. Just shut up and fix this. Unfreeze the corporate card. I know you did something to the bank. You called them and told them some lie. I did not lie, I said. I told them the truth. I told them that the owner of the company had fled the country with stolen funds and that the company was insolvent. Which brings me to the other news you might have missed. While you were ordering caviar, Victoria slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a fax confirmation from the Cook County Sheriff's Office. What news? Gregory snapped. Stop playing games. I picked up the paper. The news about your house, I said. The sheriff posted a notice of seizure on your front door about an hour ago. The locks have been changed. The property is now under the control of Vanguard Holdings. There was a moment of silence on the line, a heavy, static-filled void. Vanguard Holdings, Gregory whispered. That is the company that bought my debt. How do you know about them? I am Vanguard Holdings Gregory, I said. I could hear him breathing short, sharp gasps like a fish thrown onto a dock. You, he stammered. I bought your debt 2 years ago, I said. I bought it to save you. I bought it so the bank would not take your home. I let you pay minimum interest. I let you skip payments. I tried to give you a chance to build something, but you did not build anything. Gregory, you stole from me, and the loan agreement has a very specific clause regarding criminal activity and flight risks. You triggered it. I called the loan. You are in default. The house is gone. The trucks are gone. The tools are gone. You cannot do that, Gregory shrieked. That is my house. That is my equity. It is collateral, I corrected him, and now it is mine. Evelyn's voice cut in shrill and panicked. Dad, stop it. Just stop it. This is insane. We are family. You cannot take our home. Where are we going to live when we come back? You are not coming back to that house, Evelyn, I said, and frankly, I do not think you need to worry about where you will live in America for a while. You have bigger problems right there in France. What problems? Gregory yelled. We are just stuck at a hotel. We will figure it out. We have the money in your account. The trust money. As soon as we get to a computer, I will transfer it to a new bank. You cannot touch that. That is Evelyn's inheritance. I looked at Victoria. She shook her head slowly, a look of pity on her face, not for them but for their stupidity. Gregory, I said, leaning closer to the phone, you really do not understand how money works, do you? That $850,000 was in an irrevocable trust. When Evelyn moved it to a personal account without my signature, she committed tax fraud. Gregory screamed. We took it fair and square. The power of attorney gave us the right. The power of attorney gave you the ability. I said it did not give you the right. By moving that money, you triggered an immediate taxable event. Victoria calculated it for me. Between the federal income tax, the state tax, the early withdrawal penalty, and the fines for breaching fiduciary duty, you owe the IRS approximately 77% of that total. I let that number sink in. 77%, Gregory, and since you have already spent $50,000 on first-class tickets and hotels and watches, you are currently dipping into the government's share. The IRS froze that account, not me. They saw a massive unauthorized transfer and they locked it down. You are not fighting me anymore, son. You are fighting the United States Treasury. You are lying, Gregory shouted, but his voice was thin now, trembling with terror. You are a liar. You are just a bitter old man trying to scare us. I am eating a steak dinner in a warm apartment, Gregory, I said. You are standing in the rain in Paris with no money, no home, and a federal warrant likely being drafted for your arrest. Who sounds scared to you? I hate you. Evelyn sobbed in the background. I hate you so much. I know, I said. You hate me because I stopped letting you use me. You hate me because I cut the strings, but you need to save your energy, Evelyn. You're going to need it. I signaled to Victoria that I was done. I had said what needed to be said. Goodbye, Gregory, I said. Good luck with the French police. I reached out and pressed the red button, ending the call. The silence that filled the room was heavy, but it was peaceful. I took another bite of my steak. It was delicious. But 4.0 meter away on the Rukong, the silence had been replaced by violence. I learned the details later from the police report and from the embassy transcripts, but I can see it as clearly as if I were standing there in the rain. Gregory stared at the phone in his hand, his brain unable to process the total annihilation of his world. He looked at the locked doors of the Ritz. He looked at the pile of wet luggage. He looked at his mother coughing and wheezing on the suitcase. And then he looked at Evelyn. It was her father. It was her trust fund. It was her idea to take the trip. It was her failure to secure the money. In his weak, selfish mind, everything that was happening was her fault. He saw his future dissolving the bankruptcy, the homelessness, the prison time, and he snapped. You stupid witch! Gregory screamed, throwing the phone onto the wet pavement. He lunged at her. Evelyn screamed as Gregory grabbed her by the shoulders and slammed her back against the stone facade of the building. You did this, he roared, shaking her so hard her head snapped back. You told me he was senile. You told me the money was safe. You lost everything, you useless, spoiled brat. He raised his hand and slapped her. It was a loud crack that echoed in the street. Evelyn fell to her knees, covering her face, sobbing. Teresa tried to stand up, wheezing, reaching out to stop him. Gregory, what are you doing? Stop it! Gregory shoved his own mother away, his eyes wild and unseeing. Shut up, he yelled. Just shut up, both of you. He turned back to Evelyn, raising his fist again, ready to take out all his fear and failure on the woman he had promised to protect. But the commotion had drawn attention. The doorman from the Ritz had already pressed the panic button under his desk. 2 blocks away, a patrol car of the Police National had been idling, and the officers saw the assault. Sirens wailed, cutting through the rain. Blue lights flashed against the wet stones. Gregory froze his fist in the air. He turned to see 3 officers running toward him, batons drawn shouting commands in French. Our police Kushu Gregory did not get down. He was too stunned, too arrogant, too stupid. He tried to explain. He tried to step toward them, raising his hands but not in surrender and agitation. That was a mistake. The lead officer tackled him. Gregory hit the cobblestones hard, his face pressed into the dirty water of the gutter. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. "Get off me!" he screamed in English, thrashing against the officers. "Do you know who I am? I am an American citizen. I have rights." "You are under arrest for public disturbance and assault," the officer said in heavily accented English, yanking Gregory to his. As they dragged him toward the patrol car, Gregory looked back. He saw his mother slumped on the luggage, gasping for air. He saw his wife bleeding from her lip, sitting in a puddle of rain, and he saw the lights of the Ritz shining warm and golden, unreachable, and closed to him forever. He was going to a cell, and he was going alone. While Gregory was spending his first night on a thin mattress in a holding cell at the commissariat in the first arrondissement of Paris, my daughter and her mother-in-law were discovering just how hard the city benches are. They had been left on the sidewalk when the police took Gregory away. The officers had looked at them, saw two American women surrounded by luxury luggage, and assumed they were simply tourists having a domestic dispute. They gave them a warning to move along and drove off, with the only man who could carry the heavy bags. Evelyn and Teresa dragged the 6 suitcases 2 blocks before Teresa collapsed again, her breathing a ragged whistle. They found a bench in the Twillers' garden near the Rue de Rivoli. It was wet, it was cold, and it was the only bed they could afford. They sat there huddled together under a silk scarf, shivering as the rain turned to a damp mist. The Eiffel Tower twinkled in the distance, a cruel beacon of the romance they had come to find. Teresa complained about her back, about the cold, about the injustice of it all. Evelyn did not speak. She just stared at her phone, watching the battery drain down to 4%, waiting for a miracle that was not coming. She thought about the warm bed she had left in Los Angeles. She thought about the father she had betrayed. She wondered if I was sleeping in a shelter. I was not sleeping in a shelter. I was sitting in Victoria Croft's office the next morning, and on the desk between us sat a small plastic Tupperware container. It was unassuming. It looked like leftovers from a Tuesday lunch. But inside that container was the weapon that would finish Teresa Kingsley. "You kept the soup?" Victoria asked, looking at the container with a mixture of revulsion and respect. Clear's throat. "I am an engineer, Victoria," I said. "When a structure fails unexpectedly, you keep the debris for analysis. You do not throw away the evidence of the collapse." When Teresa brought this over, I tasted metal. After I woke up from the sedation, I poured the rest into this container and hid it in the back of the freezer behind the frozen peas. I knew I might need it someday. I slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a toxicology report from a private lab I had visited yesterday afternoon, leaving the apartment. I had used $500 of my new cash to expedite the results, benzoazepines. Victoria read, her eyes widening, and a high concentration of crushed antihistamines. "Frank, this is not just sedation. This is poisoning. Given your age and your heart condition, this cocktail could have killed you. That was the point," I said calmly. "Or at least they did not care if it did. If I died, the trust would have dissolved immediately to Evelyn without any oversight. Teresa was betting on a widowmaker." Victoria put the paper down. Her face was hard. "This changes everything, Frank. This is no longer just financial fraud or theft. This is attempted manslaughter. It is aggravated elder abuse in the first degree in Illinois that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 6 to 30 years. Do it," I said. "File the charges." Victoria picked up her phone. She called the district attorney directly. She did not use the main line. She used the number she saved for cases that required immediate violent legal intervention. I listened as she explained the situation, the toxicology report, the motive, the flight risk. I watched her nod. "They are issuing the warrant now," she told me, hanging up. "And because Teresa is currently overseas, they are flagging her passport in the international database. It is a red notice, Frank. Not the kind for terrorists, but the kind that tells every husband's agent in the world that this person is a fugitive." I nodded. It was done. The trap was not just shut. It was welded tight. In Paris, the morning sun slowly rose above the Louvre, painting the ancient stone statues in soft shades of pale pink and gold. The air carried the warm scent of freshly baked bread, drifting from nearby Boulangerie. It should have been a beautiful morning, one of those quiet, romantic Parisian dawns tourists travel across the world to experience. But for Evelyn and Teresa, it felt like the beginning of another nightmare. They were stiff from the cold night air and painfully hungry. Their designer clothes, once immaculate, were now wrinkled and stained with dust from the gravel paths. Joggers and early commuters passed by the park benches, casting them brief glances filled with the particular Parisian mixture of irritation and indifference reserved for people who looked out of place. Teresa tried to push herself upright from the bench, but winced sharply, clutching her side. "We need to go to the embassy," she rasped her voice. "We are American citizens. They have to help us. They can arrange flights. They can get us home." Evelyn nodded slowly, her mind numb from exhaustion and fear. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen. 2% battery, just enough perhaps to find the embassy address. She quickly opened her email, hoping desperately for a message from Gregory. Maybe he had been released. Maybe he had solved everything somehow. Maybe the nightmare was finally ending. There was a new message waiting. But it wasn't from Gregory. The subject line appeared in bold red letters. Urgent notification. United States Department of State Consular Affairs. Evelyn's fingers trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She tapped the message, watching as it slowly loaded line by line across the screen. To Mrs. Teresa Kingsley and Miss Evelyn Vance, notice of passport revocation and demand for surrender. She read the words again, but they made no sense. It felt like staring at a language she didn't understand. The message continued pursuant to an arrest warrant, issued by the state of Illinois for the charge of aggravated elder abuse and attempted manslaughter involving the use of a toxic substance. The United States passport belonging to Teresa Kingsley has been revoked effective immediately. The subject is considered a fugitive from justice. Evelyn's breathing became shallow. Aggravated elder abuse, attempted manslaughter, fugitive. Teresa Kingsley is required to surrender herself to the nearest local law enforcement agency or the United States consulate in Paris immediately for processing and extradition. Failure to comply will result in additional federal charges for flight to avoid prosecution. Miss Evelyn Vance is named as a person of interest and material witness and is advised to accompany Mrs. Kingsley during surrender. Evelyn slowly lowered the phone. The entire world seemed to tilt sideways. "What is it?" Teresa asked impatiently, noticing the shock on Evelyn's face. "Did Gregory fix the problem? Did he transfer the money?" Evelyn stared at the woman sitting beside her, the same woman who had spent years whispering poison in her ear. The woman who constantly insisted that my money belonged to them. The woman who had handed me that bowl of soup. "You poisoned him," Evelyn whispered. Teresa frowned sharply. "What nonsense are you talking about? You poisoned my father," Evelyn said again, her voice suddenly rising. "The soup? You drugged the soup? You told me it was just melatonin. You said it was harmless." Teresa glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. "It was necessary," she hissed. "He was in the way. He was never going to give us the money. I did what had to be done for us. For us." Evelyn let out a hysterical laugh that sounded half like a sob. "There is no us anymore. There is only you going to prison." She shoved the phone directly in front of Teresa's face. "Rat it," she demanded. "Read exactly what you've done." Teresa squinted at the screen. As she scanned the message, the color drained from her face until her skin looked pale and brittle like old parchment. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, like a fish gasping on dry land. "Manslaughter," she whispered weakly. "Extradition. They can't do that. I'm an old woman. I have asthma. You're a criminal," Evelyn snapped. "And now you're going to jail. And me? I'm a person of interest. Do you understand what that means? It means I'm an accomplice. It means I helped you try to kill my own father." Evelyn lifted her head and looked around the park. 2 French police officers, gendarmes, were walking their bicycles slowly down the gravel path. Their eyes lingered on the 2 women arguing loudly on the bench. They noticed the luggage beside them. One officer raised a radio to his mouth. Evelyn suddenly realized something terrifying. Her phone battery was about to die, and her freedom might disappear with it. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase. "Where are you going?" Teresa cried, reaching toward her. "I'm going to the consulate," Evelyn said, stepping backward. "I'm turning you in. Maybe if I cooperate. Maybe if I tell them everything, they'll let me go home." "You can't do that," Teresa screamed as she struggled to stand. "We're family." "Family doesn't poison family," Evelyn shouted back. And family doesn't steal their father's life savings. We deserve this, Teresa, every bit of it. With that, Evelyn turned and ran across the gravel path, dragging her suitcase behind her. The wheels rattled loudly against the stones like distant gunfire. She ran straight toward the two police officers, waving her arms wildly. "Help me!" she shouted in English. "Please help me! She's the one you want! She's the poisoner!" Teresa remained frozen on the bench. She watched Evelyn run. Clear's throat. She watched the officers turn their heads toward the shouting woman, then shift their attention slowly back toward her. Moments later, they mounted their bicycles and began pedaling in her direction. Teresa slowly sank back onto the bench. In the distance, the Eiffel Tower stood tall against the brightening sky. She looked down at her wrist. The Rolex was gone. She closed her eyes and waited for the handcuffs. The week that followed Evelyn's flight from the Tuileries Garden was not a vacation. It was a descent into a level of purgatory that Dante himself might have hesitated to write. My daughter, who had spent her entire life sleeping on orthopedic mattresses and eating organic produce, found herself learning the hard geography of Parisian homelessness. She did not go straight to the consulate that first day. Fear paralyzed her. She spent the first night hiding in a metro station, huddled against a tiled wall that smelled of urine and bleach, watching the rats scurry along the tracks. She had no money for food. She had no water. Her battery died within an hour, leaving her with a black mirror that reflected only her own grime-streaked face. For 7 days, she existed as a ghost in the city of light. She learned that the beautiful fountains were cold. She learned that the waiters who had smiled at her when she wore diamonds looked through her when she was begging a glass of tap water. She learned that hunger is not a sensation but a physical pain, a sharp cramp that twists your insides until you are willing to eat a half-finished croissant left on a bistro table by a tourist. Teresa fared no better. After the police picked her up in the garden, she was held in a detention center for immigrants and vagrants. They gave her an inhaler because the French are not barbarians, but they did not give her sympathy. She sat in a holding cell, surrounded by people whose languages she did not understand, stripping her of every ounce of her pretension. It took a week for the bureaucratic gears to grind into position. The U.S. consulate finally processed Evelyn's desperate plea for repatriation. It is not a free ticket, as many people think. It is a loan, a repatriation loan that effectively seizes your citizenship until every cent is paid back. They were reunited at Charles de Gaulle Airport. They did not hug. They stood 10 feet apart, staring at each other with eyes full of hate. Teresa looked 20 years older. Her hair was a matted gray nest. Her expensive clothes were ruined, stained with the filth of the detention center. Evelyn looked hollow. Her designer dress was torn at the hem. She had lost weight, the kind of rapid, unhealthy weight loss that comes from starvation and terror. Gregory was not there. The French legal system moves at its own pace, and assault on a public street is not taken lightly. He was sitting in the Roman center at Lante, waiting for a judge who was on vacation. He would be there for months. My daughter was leaving her husband behind, and she did not even look back. The flight home was a masterpiece of karmic symmetry. On the way over, they had sat in row 1, sipping vintage champagne and reclining in lie-flat beds. On the way back, the consulate had booked them the cheapest possible seats on a budget carrier, row 58, the very last row of the plane. The seats that do not recline because they are jammed up against the rear bulkhead. They boarded last, escorted by a consulate official who handed their paperwork to the flight attendant with a look of disdain. They had to walk the entire length of the plane. They walked past business class where businessmen worked on laptops. They walked past economy, plus where families settled in with extra leg room. They walked past hundreds of eyes that looked at their stained clothes and their smell. They squeezed into their seats. Evelyn took the window, hoping to hide her face against the plastic shade. Teresa took the aisle. Between them sat a man who had clearly engaged in a pre-flight drinking marathon at the airport bar. He smelled of cheap whiskey and old sweat. He was asleep before the wheels left the tarmac, his head lolling onto Evelyn's shoulder, his snores loud and wet. The flight was 8 hours long. The air conditioning in the back of the plane was broken, blowing hot, stale air that smelled of the lavatories located just 2 feet behind Teresa's head. Every 5 minutes, the toilet door would slam. Every 5 minutes, the chemical smell of blue sanitizer would wash over them. Teresa spent the first 2 hours complaining. She demanded water. She demanded a pillow. She demanded to speak to the captain. The flight attendants, overworked and underpaid, simply ignored her. They knew who these passengers were. The manifest had them flagged as deportees. No service, no alcohol, just a seat and a belt. Evelyn sat in silence. She stared out the window at the endless Atlantic Ocean. She thought about the champagne photo she had posted. She thought about the caption, "New Beginnings." She realized with a sickening lurch in her span that this was indeed a new beginning, but not the one she had ordered. She thought about me. She thought about the $12 she had left me. She wondered if I was angry. She did not understand yet that I was past anger. I was in execution mode. As the plane began its descent toward John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, the turbulence hit. The plane bucked and dropped. The drunk man woke up and vomited into a bag, splashing Evelyn's shoes. Teresa started to hyperventilate, clutching her chest, screaming that they were going to crash. Evelyn did not scream. She just closed her eyes and prayed for the ground. She thought that landing would be the end of the nightmare. She thought that once she stepped off the plane, she could disappear into the crowd. Find a bus call, a friend, restart. She was wrong. The landing was just the transition from the frying pan into the fire. The plane taxied to the gate. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The passengers stood up, eager to grab their bags and get home. Evelyn and Teresa stood up too, their legs cramped and swollen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "We ask that everyone remain in their seats for just a moment. We have local authorities boarding the aircraft to escort some passengers off first." A hush fell over the cabin. People looked around, whispering. Evelyn froze. She looked at Teresa. Teresa's face went white. "It is for me," Teresa whispered, terrified. "It is the poison." "They are not coming for me," Evelyn told herself. "I didn't do anything. I just signed the papers. I am just a witness. I am the daughter. They will let me go." Two officers from the Port Authority Police Department walked down the aisle. They were big men with serious faces and guns on their hips. Behind them walked two men in dark suits holding briefcases. They walked past the first-class cabins. They walked past the economy rows. They walked all the way to row 58. "Barbara Kingsley," one of the unformed officers said. Teresa tried to shrink into her seat. "Yes," she squeaked. "You are under arrest for attempted manslaughter, aggravated elder abuse, and flight to avoid prosecution," the officer said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. He didn't be gentle. He pulled her up, roughly spinning her around. He clicked the cuffs onto her wrists tight. "I have asthma," Teresa wailed. "You can't do this. I am an old woman." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, pushing her down the aisle. Evelyn watched her mother-in-law being hauled away. She felt a surge of relief. It was over. They had taken the bad guy. She picked up her purse. She prepared to follow them off to explain that she was a victim, too. Then the two men in suits stepped forward, blocking her path. They did not have handcuffs. They had badges on lanyards around their necks. "Evelyn Vance?" one of them asked. "Yes," she said, putting on her best tragic face. "I am so glad you are here. That woman, she forced me to." "Ms. Vance," the agent interrupted, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "I am Special Agent Kingsley with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." Evelyn stopped. "The IRS, Shatitra. We have a warrant to detain you for questioning regarding the unauthorized withdrawal of $850 from the Vance Family Trust," the agent said, "as well as structured transactions to avoid reporting requirements and wire fraud," Evelyn whispered. "But that was my inheritance." "It was a trust fund," the agent corrected. "And until your father dies, it is federal tax jurisdiction. You moved it, you spent it, and you didn't pay the taxes on it. That makes it a federal crime." "Ms. Vance," he gestured to the door, "we have a car waiting. We need to review your assets, or what is left of them." Evelyn looked at the passengers watching her. She saw the judgment in their eyes. She saw the drunk man wiping his mouth and smirking. She realized then that there was no running. There was no hiding. The structural engineer had not just demolished her house, he had demolished her future. She walked down the aisle, head bowed, flanked by the tax agents. It was the longest walk of her life from the back of the plane to the front. Past the first-class seats she had once occupied, past the flight attendants who refused to make eye contact, out into the jet bridge where the cold air of New York smelled like jet fuel and justice. I wasn't there to see it. I was in my new apartment drinking tea and reading a book, but I didn't need to be there. I knew the load limits of the human spirit, and I knew that my daughter had just hit her breaking point. The gavel came down with a sound like a cracking bone, echoing through the sterile air of the Cook County Courthouse. Teresa Kingsley stood in the defendant's box wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her pale gray skin. She did not look like the woman who had sipped champagne at 30,000 feet. She looked like a crumpled tissue. The judge, a woman with eyes as hard as flint, did not buy the tears or the theatrical wheezing. The toxicology report was damning. The traces of sedatives found in the soup container I had preserved were a chemical fingerprint of her malice. 5 years. The judge pronounced her voice devoid of pity. 5 years in a state penitentiary for aggravated elder abuse and attempted manslaughter. Teresa screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw sound of disbelief. As the bailiffs took her arms, she looked back at the gallery, searching for someone to save her, but Gregory was still in France, and Evelyn was sitting 3 rows back, her head in her hands, trying to make herself invisible to the IRS agents waiting in the hallway. I sat in the front row. I did not smile. I simply nodded once, acknowledging the structural integrity of the justice system. Teresa was removed from the courtroom and from my life. 1 month later, Gregory finally returned to American soil. The French authorities had released him with a suspended sentence and a lifetime ban from entering the European Union. He landed at O'Hare with nothing but a plastic bag containing his personal effects and a deportation order. He took a bus to his office, hoping to salvage something, hoping that maybe the business was still standing. He found the doors padlocked. A notice from the sheriff was taped to the glass, covering the logo he had been so proud of. The assets had been liquidated. The trucks were sold. The tools were auctioned. He called the number listed on the foreclosure notice, hoping to beg the new owner for a second chance. He didn't know who Vanguard Holdings was. He thought it was a faceless corporation. When I answered the phone, I heard his breath hitch. "Hello, Gregory," I said. "You," he whispered. "You took it all." "I took what was owed," I corrected him. "You defaulted on the loan, son. The deficiency judgment is $2 million. That is what you still owe me after the liquidation. And since you have no assets, I have garnished your future wages. 25% of every paycheck you earn for the rest of your life comes to me." He hung up. I heard later that he tried to get a job in construction, but word travels fast in this industry. No one hires a thief who steals from his own family. He ended up taking a job as a night shift janitor at the very mall where he used to buy his suits. It was poetic. He was cleaning up the messes of people who could afford the life he used to pretend he had. Then came Evelyn. She came to my new apartment 3 days after Gregory's return. She didn't call first. She just showed up at the door. She looked thin, brittle, like a dry twig that would snap in a strong wind. She was wearing old jeans and a sweater I recognized from high school. The designer clothes had been seized by the government as assets. I let her in. I made her tea. I am not a monster. I am a father, but I am a father who had learned that feeding a parasite only makes it stronger. She sat on the edge of my sofa, holding the mug with both hands to warm them. She didn't drink. She just looked at the steam. "The IRS is going to prosecute," she said softly. "They are offering a deal. If I pay back the tax debt and the penalties, they won't pursue prison time. But it is $400,000, Dad. I don't have it. Gregory doesn't have it. If I don't pay, they are going to garnish me forever. I will never own a home, Frank. I will never have credit. I will be bankrupt before I am 35. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Please, Dad, you have the money. The rest of the house, sell the investments. Just write the check. Please, I am your daughter." I looked at her. I saw the little girl I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I had driven to prom. And I saw the woman who had left me with $12. I stood up and walked to my desk. Evelyn's eyes followed me, lighting up with a flicker of hope. She thought I was going for the checkbook. She thought the old soft Frank was back. I opened the drawer, but I didn't take out a checkbook. I took out a single piece of yellowed paper preserved in a plastic sleeve. It was brittle with age. I walked back and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked, frowning. "Radit," I said. She leaned forward. It was a hospital bill from 20 years ago. The date was 3 weeks before her mother, Eleanor, had died. The total at the bot was staggering $150,000. Mom's chemo, Evelyn read. Experimental treatment, I corrected her. My insurance wouldn't cover it. They said it was too risky, too expensive. Your mother wanted to give up. She said we needed the money for your college fund. She wanted to die to save our savings. Evelyn looked up, confusion clouding her face. But you paid it. We had the house. I went to college. How did you pay it? I sold my dignity, I said, my voice hard. I went to my boss, a man I despised, a man who cut corners on safety, and I begged. I offered to sign off on architectural plans that I knew were substandard, not dangerous, but cheap. I traded my reputation for that money. I spent 5 years looking over my shoulder, praying those buildings wouldn't crack. I sold my soul to buy your mother. 3 more months of life because that is what you do for family. You sacrifice yourself. You don't sacrifice them. I tapped the paper with my finger. I paid this debt with my honor, Evelyn? You created your debt with your greed. You didn't steal to save a life. You stole to buy champagne. You stole to buy a villa. You stole because you thought you were entitled to the sweat off my back. But I am sorry, she sobbed, sliding off the sofa to her knees. I am so sorry, Daddy. I learned my lesson. Please save me. I looked down at her. It would be so easy to write the check. I had the money. But if I wrote that check, I wouldn't be saving her. I would be destroying the lesson. I would be teaching her that tears are a currency that can buy you out of no, I said. Her wailing stopped. She looked at me in shock. No, I repeated. I am not going to pay the IRS, Evelyn. That is your debt. It is the price of the ticket you bought. You wanted to live a high life without earning it. Now you have to live a hard life to pay for it. She stood up slowly, wiping her face. Her expression changed. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a cold, hard hate, the same look she had given me in the pharmacy when she took my phone. I hate you, she hissed. You are a cruel old man. Theresa was right. You should have rotted in that home. Get out, I said, pointing to the door. She left, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. A week later, I received the notification from the court. Evelyn had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It wiped out her credit card debt, but it didn't touch the federal tax debt. That sticks. That follows you. The judge was not lenient because the debt was incurred through fraud. She was not allowed to discharge it easily. She was sentenced to 3 years of community service and 5 years of probation. She was assigned to pick up trash along the interstate highways. The next time I saw my daughter was 6 months later. I was driving my new car down I-90 headed out of the city. I saw a crew of workers in orange vests on the side of the road, holding plastic bags and spearing litter with sticks. I slowed down. I saw her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked older. She was picking up a fast food wrapper from the mud. She looked up as my car passed. Our eyes met for a second. I didn't honk. I didn't wave. I just kept driving. She was finally working for a living, and in a way, that was the greatest gift I could have given her. She was learning the value of $1, even if it was $1 found in the dirt. The auction of the property at 42 Willow Creek Drive was a quiet affair. It did not have the fanfare of a grand opening or the drama of a police raid. It was simply a transaction. A group of investors stood on the lawn where Gregory used to park his leased trucks, and they bid on the bones of his ego. I stood at the back of the crowd wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, watching the gavel fall sold. The word hung in the cool autumn air. The house where my daughter and her husband had plotted to put me in a nursing home was gone, sold to a young couple who looked at the structure and saw a future, not knowing the history of greed that lived within the walls. The liquidation of Vanguard Holdings' assets was equally efficient. The tools, the trucks, the office furniture, everything was converted into a cashier's check. After paying off the bank and the legal fees, there was a surplus. It was a significant amount of money, almost $300,000. It was money that Gregory had sweated for in his own way. Money that represented the equity of his life before he decided to steal mine. Legally, it was mine. I could have added it to my retirement fund. I could have bought a boat. I could have burned it. But I had a better idea. I drove my old sedan to the south side of Los Angeles to a building that looked tired but dignified. It was the St. Jude Center for the Abandoned Elderly. It was a place for people who had no families, or worse families, who had forgotten them. It was the kind of place Teresa and Evelyn had tried to send me to, only this one was run by nuns who actually cared. I walked into the director's office. Sister Margaret looked up from her desk, her eyes weary behind thick glasses. She saw an old man in a windbreaker, and she smiled, the kind of patient smile reserved for those asking for help. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. I placed the cashier's check on her desk. "I want to make a donation," I said. She picked up the check. She adjusted her glasses. Then she took them off and wiped them and looked again. Her hands started to tremble. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, "is this real?" "It is real," I said. "It is the proceeds from a business venture that went sour. I want this money to ensure that no one in this facility ever has to eat cold soup or sleep on a lumpy mattress. I want you to buy new beds. I want you to hire better nurses. I want you to make sure that when these people close their eyes at night, they know they still have value." She started to cry. She came around the desk and hugged me. It was the first genuine hug I had received in years. "Why?" she asked. "Why us?" "Because," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I was almost one of them. And because the people who own this money forgot that honor is worth more than real estate, I left the center feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. The weight of the anger, the weight of the betrayal, it stayed in that office along with the money. I was free. The next stop was the RV dealership. I didn't want a house anymore. A house is a stationary target. A house holds memories in the corners and ghosts in the hallways. I wanted a horizon that changed every morning. I used the recovered funds from the trust, which the IRS had finally cleared, after I proved the fraud, to buy a 45-foot Tiffin Zephyr. It was a land yacht. It had heated marble floors, a king-size bed, a full kitchen, and a windshield that offered a panoramic view of the world. It was excessive. It was luxurious. It was exactly what Teresa had wanted for herself in France. The irony was not lost on me as I signed the papers. I sold my sedan. I sold the furniture in my apartment. I packed 4 boxes of books, my clothes, and the picture of Eleanor. That was it. That was my life. But a man cannot travel alone. Solitude is peaceful, but loneliness is a slow poison. I needed a co-pilot. I needed someone who would not ask for money, who would not forge my signature, and who would be happy just to sit by my side. I found him at a shelter in Nebraska 3 days into my journey west. He was a golden retriever mix with one floppy ear and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. They called him Buster. I looked at him and he looked at me. He didn't bark. He just walked over and leaned his heavy head against my leg, letting out a long sigh. I renamed him Justice. It felt appropriate. We drove west. We crossed the plains where the cornfields stretched out like a golden ocean. We crossed the Rockies where the snow-capped peaks touched the sky. We drove through the red deserts of Utah, where the silence was so profound it felt like a prayer. Justice sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, his ears flapping in the wind. He was the best conversation I ever had. He listened when I talked about Eleanor. He didn't interrupt when I explained the structural integrity of the bridges we crossed. He was loyal. 6 months later, we hit the Pacific Coast Highway. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky is so blue it hurts your eyes. I was driving south toward Big Sioux. The road wound along the cliffs, a ribbon of asphalt suspended between the mountains and the sea. The ocean crashed against the rocks 500 feet below, a churning mass of white foam and deep turquoise water. I pulled the RV into a scenic overlook. I turned off the engine. The silence of the coast washed over us, broken only by the cry of seagulls and the rhythmic pounding of the surf. I made myself a cup of tea. I poured Justice a bowl of fresh water. We sat in the driver and passenger seats looking out at the edge of the continent. I was 71 years old. I had no children I could speak to. I had no wife, but I had my health. I had my dignity. And I had a view that billionaires would pay millions to own. My phone, which usually sat silent in the cup holder, suddenly lit up. It buzzed, vibrating against the hard plastic. I looked at the screen. The name flashed in bright white letters. Evelyn. I stared at it. I wondered where she was. Was she on a lunch break from her community service picking up trash on the side of the highway? Was she calling from a payphone? Was she calling to beg again? Was she calling to scream? Was she calling to tell me she hated me or to tell me she was sorry? It didn't matter. I realized with a sudden clarity that I did not care. I did not care if she was hungry.